You think he's a hypocrite?
Oh yeah, and hypocrisy was exposed in this Q&A. But I mean, a lot of people in his position are. I mean, he makes $9 million a year, and he actively campaigns to block legal adults from making money themselves. That's hypocrisy. In one answer, talking about the free market, and in the other, talking about limiting the free market is hypocrisy. Rules for me, but not for thee. That's really what that comes down to. I do find it fascinating, though, the unwillingness to change. Because, they're football coaches, right? I think we put too much stock into what sports people have to say. For example, Cam Newton said something really stupid on a podcast recently. And you've got think pieces and all this stuff. Oh, Cam Newton, how could you believe Cam Newton said... Yeah, I can. He's a football player. And I know there are a lot of athletes and coaches that do good and are very smart and are engaging in their community and stuff like that. But the only reason why you know who Cam Newton is because he plays football good. So why are you surprised that he maybe didn't have a nuanced and layered take of gender roles? He's a football player. Same thing with coaches. I don't care that Dabo Swinney, I think he's a hypocrite. He's a football coach. He's a glorified PE teacher who makes millions of dollars. So whatever. I think he's full of it. But the unwillingness to adapt and change to the modern landscape of college football, I think, is fascinating. If I were a Clemson fan and I read this, I would be terrified, relatively speaking. I'd be terrified for the future of my football program. Because Clemson has been on top, mostly because of Dabo Swinney, for a decade now. You can argue, there was a time you could argue that Clemson was the premier program in college football. They're still top 2 or 3, depending on how you want to spin it. They are on top of the college football world. But you're starting to see leaks. Quarterback development's an issue. Roster management's an issue. And now the complete unwillingness to adapt to modern college football, I think, is going to kill them. Because they don't bring many players in. They don't sign 30 people recruiting classes, generally. That's not been his style. And it's worked. Now you got guys leaving.
And here's the thing. So they've used the transfer portal once to this point, and it was to bring a former player back. He does say in this story, everybody's going to have to use the transfer portal, but we're not going to primarily build our roster that way. We're not going to get a kid just because he's talented in the transfer portal. We're going to the transfer portal if we specifically have a need to fill.
Yeah. So is he taking
Which is kind of what Nick Saban's doing, right?
That is what Saban's doing to some degree, but I mean, he got another offensive tackle today who's probably going to start next year and be really, really good.
What needs does Nick Saban have? He's always got a 5-star just sitting there waiting.
He needed a wide receiver last year, and he went and got Jamison Williams.
See,
did he really need him though?
They did.
What I'm saying is there was probably somebody on that roster that, if given the opportunity, could have produced just as well. Because there's 4 or 5 5-star receivers on that roster.
We watched them in the postseason. They weren't the same without Jamison Williams.
They weren't at that point, but if that kid had played the entire year, if somebody had played the entire year, maybe it's a different story. I'm just saying, I don't think that Jamison Williams is the reason Alabama played for a national title. They would have played for a national title without Jamison Williams.
I'm not sure I agree with that.
And need is a relative term too, of course. I mean, Alabama recruits so well.
Just the point about Dabo, he goes, just like this year, we're down one in the offensive line, and we need to find a guy. So we're actively looking for an offensive lineman between now and May to get him in here for summer school.
Well, then, not just countering his own words, he said, well, if I use the transfer portal, I'm telling my guys on the team that they're not good enough. So are you telling now your offensive linemen that you've got on campus that they're not good enough?
Exactly. I think isn't his point there that if there's a hole in our roster, then we'll go get somebody? I'm not just going to go get guys because they're good players that are available.
I hear you, but isn't that what recruiting is? It seems convoluted to be so reluctant to add talented players to your roster when that's what you do in recruiting on an annual basis. It is recruiting. Either way, the adaptability, the willingness, the forward front of NIL, for example. Look at Texas A&M. Clemson couldn't sign Texas A&M's class. You want to know why? Because they're not forward in NIL like Texas A&M is, despite their denials. Alabama already reloads basically on an annual basis. Now Nick Saban's reloading position. I mean, did he need a running back? The Georgia Tech transfer is going to be, what, their third best running back? Possibly?
Yeah.
But he got one. The reluctance to adapt would scare me. Because Nick Saban, for a time, was reluctant to adapt. Remember how much he complained about spread offenses?
Yeah, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Then he hired Lane Kiffin. And now you have, I mean, what do you hear Nick Saban complaining about anymore? NIL came. He didn't complain. Transfer portal came. He didn't complain. He doesn't even do that. He doesn't even think to whine anymore. He just beats you with it.
Right, we had the lead up to the national championship game where both. I do think coaches legitimately see problems with the transfer portal and the NIL. Not to say that they won't adapt to that, but I think that they say this may not be best for the health of college football.
And I do agree with, I think Kirby Smart talked about it. I think Lane Kiffin's mentioned it. They need to close the portal for periods of time. That's something that needs to happen.
I think that is a fantastic next step in the transfer portal world. Like, there is a window where you can put your name into the transfer portal and you can transfer. But you can't just do it willy-nilly all the time. It's wide open from the day the football season ends until the beginning of the next football season. And the SEC has put some constraints in place. Like, there's a kind of a drop-dead date on when a guy can be immediately eligible if he transfers in.
Right.
I agree with that completely. Look, Borky, I agree with both of you on the surface level that there are things that Dabo Swinney contradicts himself on a fairly regular basis. And that there are things that come up from his mouth that absolutely ring as hypocritical. But I don't think that necessarily means that every idea that he comes along is completely self-serving and, only what's good for me. Can those two things be true?
Yes. They can certainly be true. But I think it leans more towards the hypocritical than the correct.
And Dabo's also been the guy that's willing to say what's on his mind, right? I mean, if he sees something that he thinks is a problem in college football, he'll say it and is kind of willing to wear the criticism.
I'd wear a lot of criticism.